Welcome to the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And I'm Caitlin Drake. I use female pronouns, she, her, hers.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. This is the first episode in our Christianity and Pop Culture series, where we will discuss how Christianity and pop culture intersects. Our guest for this series is Reverend Sara Pugh Montgomery. Welcome, Sarah.
Hey, y'all.
Today's episode is about Christianity and literature. Spoiler alert, we're going to be talking through major themes and events in Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, Dante's Inferno, the Harry Potter series, and Hunger Games. If you are working your way through any of these pieces, you might want to save this podcast until you are finished.
So we wanted to do this series because across history and even into today, different flavors of Christianity offer theology that is in conflict with popular culture. They reject offerings from popular culture on theological grounds. And yet for me, as somebody who studied sociology, faith and culture are just so deeply intertwined that this theology is kind of confusing to me. Sarah, it seems often that really amazing parts of popular culture, film, literature, music, are produced by people of faith. So where does the rejection of pop culture come from? What are some of the theological or biblical roots of this kind of mindset?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great place for us to be able to begin. I think it really looks at, in many ways, how we write and how we talk from what we know. And so a lot of folks know their Christianity and their faith, and so we can be able to see the influences, but then you have different groups that say that they don't want those influences as a part of the way of us following Christ. And so I was even part growing up of a church where we had to sing a cappella, so we weren't allowed to have any instruments within our worship time. And the reason why they had that was because they wanted to keep us focused on God and to be able to keep us focused on what we were purposely there for, so that if we had instruments put in, we might be praising the instruments more than praising God. And so a lot of times the rejection of these things is that folks think it's going to distract us and be able to turn us away from the focal point of our faith, which is God and Christ and the Holy Spirit, and being able to focus on that. And so you can look, even within our biblical narrative, we have times where folks were distracted. So King David, he was distracted by Bathsheba, and that was a part of culture. Paul, he never married because he really believed that if you wanted to stay focused, you needed to be just by yourself and focused on just God. And so you didn't need to be distracted by a partner or distracted by love in any sort of way. And so, not any kind of loves, but just the marital loves. And so he really kind of wanted to keep us away from that. And a lot of folks have used Romans 12:2, that quote and that text around, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And they've kind of taken that and have shifted that and kind of turned it on its head to be able to reject the things of this world. So instead of being able to say, how are we a part of God's creation? It's saying reject all of these things and let's keep it out of our minds so that we can focus solely on God.
What are some points that refute this thinking? What are some Christian justifications for producing or partaking in popular culture?
Well, I think part of the, the theological backings around this is just the understanding and the knowledge that even like that last verse says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by it, is that we are a part of this world. And so we can't completely separate ourselves out. If we do that, then a lot of times we're not able to be as much of witnesses to what is going on. A lot of times I like to be able to keep up with popular culture just so that I can know what other folks are talking about and thinking about. I think it's a great way to be able to relate to people and to be able to speak in a language that they know. When I lived in North Carolina, if you knew college basketball, you could speak in somebody's language and perhaps you could meet them where they were through that. Out here, I need to know college football. And so I have to speak in that language. And so a lot of times when everybody is watching the same show or reading the same books, it's just a great way to start a conversation and then to be able to get to know someone and to get to know where their heart is. And we can really look at that through Jesus. And that's the best example that we have. Jesus did not come and meet folks and kind of, not meet them where they were. He came and met them exactly where they were, even if it was in a space of rejection or a space where the culture was rejecting them. And so he was able to say, where you are is where I am as well. And so that we can be able to enter into that space too. And then we can also look just at the many different ways that our biblical literature has so many different parts of narratives and different pieces within that. So pieces that we also have within the popular culture. So you have pieces of history and pieces of poetry and songs, and you have allegories and parables and all these things that we can also see within a popular culture setting. And so that our literature of the Bible allows us to be able to enter into these narratives in a new way as well.
And I think something that we find throughout culture is that so much of the art, the literature, the music that is produced by people who are making space to grapple with hard faith questions. And so when we first talked about doing this series and the literature part specifically, the first thing that my mind jumped to was Dante's Divine Comedy, specifically his work Inferno. Because within that piece, and I think many folks have read this maybe in like a high school English course, he's really exploring some of the origins of evil. What is a kind of consequence of evil? Is mankind inherently evil? In my high school, we had to read it in conjunction with Lord of the Flies and then write a paper on the nature of humankind and whether we're inherently good or evil. In case anyone is wondering, I came down on the side of inherently evil, mostly because I had several recent babysitting experiences gone completely awry.
I would affirm
that. Inferno is a great example of this classic piece that is somebody grappling with faith and questions of faith. Something that I love about it is the extent to which it's influenced art and culture and popular theology for the 7 centuries since it's been written. So there are famous sculptors like Rodin and writers like T.S. Eliot and artists like Salvador Dali who have been influenced or inspired by the Divine Comedy. Also, and I think, Sarah, this is probably a piece to pull you in on, Inferno really inspired our thinking around hell. So this is an artistic piece. This is not a theological piece. Dante wrote it more as a political criticism than as a religious criticism. And yet his idea of hell has stuck with us. So in terms of like, what does the Bible say about hell versus what is inspired by Inferno? Like, I think that's a grappling point, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's almost, the Bible does mention hell, but it doesn't have the layers of hell talked about. There's not this sense of, going deeper within it. There's not these fiery pits. There's not all these different pieces that Dante really is able to incorporate within his work. And you're absolutely right. I mean, through this narrative, we're able to really be able to wrestle more with what these pieces that are really hard to understand, what does that mean and what does that really look like? And so it allows us to be able to ask those hard questions and to be able to delve deeper into that. And
just a plug for later in this podcast series, when we get to films and television, we're going to talk about a more recent depiction of hell and kind of, again, the grappling with what is hell, what does that look like, when we talk about the good place. So that's exciting and something to look forward to.
Right. It'll be a nice little quarantine piece of retreat for everybody.
So as we move into some of the specific pieces of literature, I think it's important for us to make the distinction around sometimes authors or artists are intentionally grappling with questions of faith. They're intentionally creating those allegories or relying on some of that symbolism, and sometimes they're not. And so I think a really popular example of Christian allegory is Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, which, again, flashback to high school, that's how I was taught it, is that it's this huge biblical allegory. And I was a snarky teenager, and I was like, yeah, but Hemingway said that he didn't mean that. Like, he didn't do that on purpose. And my teacher was like, you still have to write the paper. But Hemingway wrote to a critic at the time, and he said, quote, "There isn't any symbolism. The sea is the sea. The old man is an old man. The sharks are all sharks, no better and no worse. All the symbolism that people say is shit. What goes beyond is what you see beyond when you know." So I think sometimes artists mean it, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes maybe they're just cranky at critics. Who knows? But it's important, I think, when we're unpacking this, to know that sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's not, and either is okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of that comes from, we talk in seminary and, within our pastoral care work about this language around something called embedded theology. And so that's the theology that's kind of always a part of us from the beginning, no matter what has happened within our narrative and within our life. And so sometimes I read pieces and I'm like, oh, that speaks to this and this and this and this and this. And that's because I'm reading within that embedded theology. I can't tear that away from myself. I can't remove myself from the lens that I come to these pieces. And so that's a great way of being able to acknowledge that, yeah, sometimes there's things that I interpret into that is not actually there, but that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to be able to interpret into that, and that I can read with that lens, because I can't dismiss my lens at all. But it's also why I think it's really helpful to be able to have conversations with other folks about these pieces too, is because each one of us has those different lenses. And so a way that I might read something is going to be very different than how you might read it, Caitlin, or how you will read it, Philip. And that's because we come from different places. We're in different, we had different experiences growing up. We lived in different areas of the US, even though we're all of the same, ethnic background, we have had a lot of different unique pieces of our lives that allow us to read into these in different ways. And so I think it's a great way to remind ourselves about that embedded piece, and about how sometimes we just, even on the conversations we'll have over the next couple of weeks with these podcasts, that sometimes some of our listeners may say, they're reading into that more than actually is. And I'm okay with that, because yeah, we might be doing that, but that's okay with me. So because you might be reading into something else that we're not reading into. So I think it's just a nice way of being in community together.
These next two books we're going to discuss together. J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis wrote some of the most influential books in Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings. Would you be able to discuss these authors and how their friendship helped in the writing of these books?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually called up my dad again this weekend to be able to find out some more information, because he's the first one who actually told me a little bit about these guys and their relationship together. So they both were in Oxford in England, and had gone to school there, and were both very studious and had kind of advanced within their fields. And they were a part of a group of men that got together at a pub once a week to discuss, Greek mythology, and being able to sort of figure out all of these different pieces. And so, they were the total nerds, kind of sitting in the side corner of the bar, drinking their pints and being able to talk about literature. And through that, Tolkien and Lewis really sort of developed a really strong kinship together, and a really great relationship with one another. And they were able to help be each other's readers through the writing of The Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia. And they, were the ones that really helped influence one another within those writings, and would encourage one another and affirm each other within them as well. And so be able to lift each other up as they were kind of journeying through these different worlds that they were completely creating.
So I think a lot of people have heard that Lewis was very intentionally Christian in his writing. And some of that is that he has publicly written more theological based books or pieces. but also that his themes within the Chronicles of Narnia are pretty, I don't want to say obvious, but they're there. So what are some of those Christian themes, specifically in Chronicles of Narnia?
Yeah. And I think he's a lot more obvious because he was also writing and gearing his work towards a children's perspective. And so he needed to kind of make sure that, children could be able to understand, just as you were talking about earlier, Caitlin, that a lot of times these pieces of art allow us to be able to grapple with what's going on in the world. And so kind of knowing that they were writing these books post World War II kind of allows us to also think about what were some of the things that were going on that kids in that day would need to be able to grapple with. And so he has a lot of war imagery and a lot of good versus evil, a lot of things that where there's, different countries that are battling against each other. But then has these, this wonderful image of Aslan, who's the lion that is the Christ character and the victor within the narratives. And so being able to have a triumphant character that also is not fully a human, and so allows them to kind of think about God in a different and unique way, and to think about Christ in a different way as well, but also can take on many of those characters of protector and comforter, and also allows them to be able to trust in something. And then you have the kids, where the kids are able to to kind of use each one of their gifts to be able to be a part of the kingdom as well, and so that they're able to bring in who they are, and to be able to bring in what God has given them, to be able to be a part of this community and of these different worlds that have been created. So it's not that the kids come in and they're just a subset part, but instead they are a central part of it by being able to be able to utilize those things that God has created within each one of them, from the oldest to the very youngest, so that we're all reminded that in wherever we are within our faith journey and wherever we are within our life, that we can be a part of living that out and of helping to share and to shape that narrative.
More people are probably surprised to learn that Tolkien was a pretty devout Christian. In a 1953 letter, Tolkien described The Lord of the Rings as a fundamentally religious and Catholic work. What Christian themes are in Tolkien's writings?
Yeah, so Tolkien did have, within their relationship, within Lewis and Tolkien, their relationship together, and when they were critiquing one another, Tolkien often said that Lewis was being, too upfront about the Christian imagery and was talking too much about these pieces. And Tolkien's like, we need to get away from these Christian images. It wasn't because he wasn't Christian, it was because he wanted to kind of create a completely different world. But yeah, y'all, it's all over the Lord of the Rings. So there's, you still have the imagery again of these wars, and so of this good versus evil. But then you also have a lot of the Christ figure imageries. You have a lot of the sacrifice imageries. You have the imageries of journeying. And so the fact of being able of how God invites us into a journey and how we're on the way towards something. And that for, Tolkien, this something is this, space where you're going to be able to destroy all evil. And, you think of that kind of as we think that we just finished up with Lent and being able to journey with Christ to the cross, which would hopefully help us be able to destroy the sin and the evil within the world. And then but one of the most beautiful pieces of Christian imagery that I love about Tolkien's work that I think is so underrated sometimes is the relationship of community and companionship within this as well. So you don't have people journeying on their own. You don't have folks that have to go out and do these things on their own. You have Sam, who's my personal favorite character, that is able to go with Frodo and be a part of each step of his journey, and to be able to support him and to be that encourager. And then at the end, to be able to really be the one to say, this is what we need to do, even though Frodo's starting to be influenced by the ring even more and more, because the more that he carries that piece, the more that it becomes a part of who he is. And that getting rid of that piece then allows him to getting rid of the ring allows him to be able to get rid of that evil that was starting to creep inside of him. And so there really is so much within within the Lord of the Rings, about sacrifice, about love and what love is and what that looks like, about being able to break through boundaries, and obviously the dualism of good versus evil, and how sin was wrapped up and was a part of something that could directly impact who they were, but that they could also get rid of that, and that they could remove that from the world. And so I think that's, there's a lot that can be played in within each one of those pieces individually, but also much more within it as an arc of a narrative work.
So now I'm sure everybody wants to go out and read Lord of the Rings or reread it if they haven't, or if they've read it before. Go for it. And since we're kind of staying in the realm of my people for this next one, the sci-fi fantasy nerd culture, maybe a little bit. But Harry Potter is kind of our next piece to look at. And Harry Potter has been a source of controversy really since it was released in the mid to late 90s. And when it was first released, I remember and there were different religious groups that claimed that it promoted paganism and witchcraft and occultism, and therefore it was undermining Christian values. And even as recently as last fall, there was a Catholic church that was making, or not a Catholic church, a school that was making headlines for banning the series from the school library, stating that the spells and curses are actual spells and curses that are capable of conjuring evil spirits. So I guess, first of all, how do you, Sarah, as a Christian leader, respond to that kind of criticism?
Well, as you heard, I just laughed at it because I think that oftentimes, this again is where we sort of can read into pieces more than what perhaps we need to read into them. And so I think that with, it's like when folks were also, I think for a while, people were banning the Scarlet Letter and, or the Crucible. And so these different pieces that really are just helping to allow us to imagine and to explore more what all of this looks like. And so when, in my mind, when folks kind of talk about Harry Potter and the witchcraft and that, if we, I've always wondered that if I can make any of those things actually happen, then perhaps I do have some magic in me. No, I'm joking. But that I think that there's just, I think it's more based on fear, and we get too scared then of this piece of other, and we get too scared of exploring and having fun and being able to be creative within this different subset, and that we're too afraid that it will influence and that it will become that biblical work or more important than the Bible, rather than being able to have the pieces be in conversation, which I think is what is more important, is to be able to have those pieces be able to talk together.
And I think in kind of a reverse Hemingway, in response to the criticisms of Harry Potter as being very focused on witchcraft or the occult, Rowling, the author, has said in several spaces kind of the opposite of that. So, quote, "To me, the religious parallels have always been obvious, but I never wanted to talk too openly about it because I thought it might show people who just wanted the story where we were going." And then she said, "The truth is that my faith will return. It's something I struggle with a lot. On any given moment, if you ask me if I believe in life after death, I think if you pulled me regularly through the week, I would come down on the side of yes, that I do believe in life after death. But it's something that I wrestle with a lot. It preoccupies me a lot, and I think that's very obvious within the books." So whereas Hemingway said, no, it's not a religious allegory, Rowling has come out and said, yeah, my faith is all over this. I mean, the fingerprints are there. But it's interesting that didn't really shut down any of the criticism that this is so occult.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, because it was still something that was so otherness. And so I think that when you have a piece that is so other and can be so based out of people's fear of children being guided or leaning towards this other side of something, that they're not going to be willing to look at the ways that, resurrection and sacrifice and, companionship and, all these pieces of Christianity that are really a part of this work are written in there, and how we can be able to use them as a way to explore that even more.
While what we hear about is the Christians who reject Harry Potter and the schools that ban the series, there's also a whole other group who finds ways for it to enhance their faith lives. I'd love to discuss the religious themes woven into the series. What are some themes in Harry Potter that are strongly tied to Christianity?
Oh, there are so many, and it is so, so good. So, obviously there's the big kind of, the big piece around sacrifice. So, and that begins from, the very beginning. So the sacrifice of love that, Harry's parents have, and his mother in particular has, in order to be able to die for her child, to die for her son. But then that sacrifice piece really continues to carry throughout the whole book. And, and that question of what are you willing to die for? And especially at the end with the war and kind of all of these, deaths that happen at the very end, of being able to look and to see about, how each one of the characters were willing to stake their lives and to die for something and for a cause within the world. And that's what Christ is always inviting us into, is what is it, what's that cross that you're willing to carry? What's the thing that's so important in this world that you're going to stake your life for it? How does that point and direct folks towards God? And so you have this huge theme of sacrifice. You also have these, huge themes at the same time that interplay with that, of love and of being able to see how love is a part of that sacrifice. And so it's, so it's a sacrifice that's grounded and based within that sense of love, and that there's different aspects of love within the whole thing. So we have Lewis that we talked about earlier, and Lewis wrote about the different types of love, so the 4 kind of types of love, and you see each one of those played out within this book and within this narrative as well. And so being able to see how love is a huge impact, and how being able to love one another can be a part of helping us be willing to take the risks that we would need to take to be able to live in the world. But also the thing that I really love around love with Harry Potter is the relationship between Harry and Ron and Hermione. And that you don't have just, while you do have one central figure of a Christ figure through Harry, Harry can't do any of it without those other 2. And so, even from the very beginning, from the first book, when they're having to figure out their way to be able to get, and they have to go through all these different obstacles, they have to go through one where Ron knows how to be able to beat the chess game. And so he's the one that helps them out. And then Hermione is able to help them out in the next one. And then, Harry is always the one who has to go the deepest into each one of the challenges at the end. But he couldn't get there without his friends. And, and so we really can see again, about the Christian journey and invitation that, Christ always tells us, like, don't go out by yourself, like go in pairs, go with groups, because it's through that journey together that we're invited to be able to be able to bring Christ and to bring that love to others. And so you have that great example through that friendship of these 3 characters that I absolutely love. And then you just have some wonderful examples of courage, some wonderful examples of morality, some great examples of being able to have faith in the greater good. But the other thing that I really love in terms of a Christian theme with Harry Potter is this way of becoming and of growing up within the world. And so in a lot of ways, Harry Potter, each one of the books kind of gets deeper and gets a little darker and then kind of turns at the end. But that's because it's all about like being able to grow up as well. And so we're growing up with Harry as we read these books, and he's growing up and learning more about who he is. And so it's kind of like how I would imagine that maybe Christ would have been as a boy as well. And so being able to kind of have these different struggles of what does it mean to have these powers, and what does it mean to be able to be the one that has to sacrifice. And so it kind of gives me a little bit of a way to be able to actually play a little bit with that piece that we don't have within our biblical narrative of what it was like for Christ to be a child. And so we're able to kind of play around with that a little bit within this, within this work, and be able to see a little bit more about what would have been some of the struggles and challenges that maybe Jesus would have had as a younger boy. And so how can we think about that through watching Harry grow?
And within Harry Potter, beyond just the themes, there are also some really strong parallels that are either biblical, kind of intentionally, or theological parallels. So can you dive into some of those too?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wish this was one of those things where like people could call in or could write in stuff on the, on the Zoom thing as we're talking, because there are things that other folks are also obviously going to pick up on that we are not going to have time for today. But I would love to hear other people's stories about that. But I think you have, obviously the resurrection account at the very end. And so, being able to have an image of a character who actually dies, and then goes into this afterlife, and that in the afterlife he's greeted again by Dumbledore and is taught, able to talk in the afterlife, and then is sent back. And so there's not a lot of times that I can remember of when that resurrection of coming back, and when we get that piece of kind of what happens in that afterlife, and that being able to be in this other space, and then being able to be sent back, what that really looks like. And so I just love how J.K. Rowling talks about that, and how she really explores this idea of what does life after death actually mean, and then how can we be a part of living into that. And so this whole resurrection account is obviously huge. Then you have, Philip found this great quote of being able to look at how Dumbledore is perhaps like John the Baptist, which, so if you're thinking of Harry as Jesus, you can also think of Dumbledore as John the Baptist, and being able to prepare the way for folks to be able to have, to be able to meet Christ within the world. And so in this case, Dumbledore is preparing the way and kind of setting the course forward for Harry, and being able to set all of that up. And so I loved that idea of Dumbledore as John the Baptist, and also kind of, it's kind of fun because John the Baptist was always this, kind of kooky character, and Dumbledore is a little kooky as well. So you have this, also these other ways of being able to pull those together too. And then you have the images of the stag on the lake. And so when Harry, these images of different ways that people also can come back and be a part of our lives, these communion of saints, when Harry is with the goblet of fire, and when he is able to capture the goblet at the very end, and then is at the place in the cemetery, and he's fighting with Voldemort, and then his family and other people that have died come around and surround him, and are able to put this kind of case of protection over him. And so you have, again, this communion of saints, and this company and companionship of others that surround you as well. So there's, all of these wonderful and beautiful ways of being able to see kind of how she is able to take a piece of a story and then really kind of pull that out and interpret that in new and in different ways for us.
And in the piece that Philip had recommended, there was a really good reading, again, of that kind of stag on the lake part that I had not thought about. But the spell for the patroness, expecto patronum, tied to expect the father, and then the stag is representative of Harry's father, that was his animagus. And so, but Harry is the one casting it, so he is both the father and the son within that. And so there's that Trinitarianism, which part of me is like, hands off my Harry Potter, and like, don't read too much into it, but also that's pretty fun and interesting. So
that's so cool and nerdy. I love it. But yes, it's a wonderful way to bring those pieces together.
Now we're going to pivot away from Harry Potter to the Hunger Games. Would you be able to explain, just maybe as short as you can, the premise of Hunger Games for those who have not read the story?
Yes, and it turns out Caitlin has not read this story. So we're also
sorry.
Explaining it for Caitlin. But for others who have not also read the story, you now have a great set of books to read. I do think it's kind of funny that everything that we're talking about is a series, and so it's a set of more than one book. But that the Hunger Games is based on this image of a dystopian world where there is a central power within a space called the Capitol, and that people kind of rose up against the Capitol at one point. And so the Capitol then put them all into different districts in order to control and confine them, and celebrates the kind of the squashing of everybody's power within this swell of these games called the Hunger Games. So 2 people from each one of the districts come to be able to participate in the Hunger Games, except this is not like a fun game to participate in, because you come and you basically are trying to live. So there are 24 folks, because there's 12 districts and 2 from each district, 1 male and 1 female. And so they come, and basically it's a battle to fight. And so it's very similar to kind of the Greek, times when folks would, or the Romans sort of, when they would have the, what's that thing called? I don't know what it's called.
The Colosseum and like the gladiators.
Yes. So like the gladiators, the Colosseum sort of work. And so being able to have that image of being able to gather folks together, and that is a spectator sport for all of those that are in the Capitol. And so that's the kind of overall premise. And then because it's a book, obviously we're going to have then some kind of breaking of what those games mean. And that's sort of what takes place within the 3 books, is a breaking apart of that power structure, and a breaking apart of this, and a new uprising against the governments.
What are some themes in the Hunger Games that are strongly tied to Christianity?
You have a lot of the same themes that we've already been talking about before, so again, some themes around sacrifice. You get that from the very beginning, when Katniss volunteers as a tribute for her sister, because her younger sister was picked as the one that would go and be a part of the Hunger Games. But then Katniss stands up and says, no, I volunteer myself as tribute. So this whole idea of sacrificing and of standing in for somebody else. And so being able to have that be a piece of what's going on, again, as a Christ figure in many ways. Then you also have these different images of love that are shown and kind of tied throughout the whole narrative. And so, just that one image, for example, of the love between family, there's love between friends, there's romantic love, and how those really shape and form us and form who we are. And then there's this great theme of being able to resist, and this resistance to the powers and to the powers that be, that are a part of what we sort of always talk about within our Christian faith, is what are we standing up for? And so there's a lot that happens within this book that is about the people wanting to stand up for something, not just standing up against the power structure, but standing up for freedom, or for being able to be united together, or and so you have this kind of overall theme of being able to work towards a greater good.
So Philip wrote all of the questions around Hunger Games, because I don't know anything about it. But this next question, the Christian faith is a faith of hope. Can you explain where in the Hunger Games there is a story of hope? Because it sounds pretty not hopeful, and that's part of why I haven't read it. I don't like dystopian stuff. So where's the hope?
Yes, it can seem very dismal and very, like Good Friday-ish, probably the majority of the time. But just like a lot of places, you have glimmers of hope throughout different pieces. And sort of, as we talk about that as Christians, we're Easter people. And so that means that we are able to see that piece of resurrection and new life, and the hope sprouting up even in the midst of ashes. You have that throughout the whole series that kind of points and directs us towards this new thing that will be happening. So even from the very first book, when Katniss befriended kind of the youngest of the fighters within the Hunger Games, and when that youngest fighter was dying during the games, she sang a song to her, and a song that was projected out over all of the different spaces where the Hunger Games were being televised. And so you were able to see this image of hope through this song and through this love of being able to be able to take death as not something that was horrible, but instead of death being something that can pull us together, as she kind of took flowers and put it all around the young woman's body. And so there's this piece of hope of being able to bring in, kind of that death is not the end, and that death is not the final answer. And so, that little piece of hope. And then you have, pieces of hope where the people come together, and where you find out that, like, oh my gosh, there's this group that has been working together for years to be able to start an uprising. And so of people that have been sort of working to be able to make new things happen and to work towards a new world where everybody is able to live together in peace, and where the powers that be are not going to be the powers any longer. And so you have this hope that you are being pointed towards something new, which will be a new way of life that is not going to be destructive. It's not going to be a place where everybody is being kind of pushed down, but instead is going to be a place where we will be able to use our gifts and be able to live in a new world together.
Obviously, Katniss is the hero of the story. However, the people she's battling in the games aren't necessarily the villains in this particular series. The villains are President Snow and the Capitol. Could you explain the religious parallels in regards to this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, this is a great series to be able to read during Holy Week, because you have this whole idea of Christ being able to overthrow, and or this idea of, well, because Christ really didn't overthrow the political system. That's not what he came to be able to do. But that through what was happening, you have the overthrowing of the powers that be within the system and within the space. And so the President Snow and the Capitol are kind of like the they are the groups that are more evil. They're the groups that are not able to see the good within people. They're the groups that look at folks as just expendable. They're folks that are for their own needs rather than people that have their own value and their own worth. And that's what Christ was always trying to do, was to flip those narratives and be able to say, what kind of worth and value do people have, and what is the way that we can be able to lift those up. And so again, if you go back to the healing narratives, a President Snow or a Capitol person would say, oh, that person needs to stay on the side of the road because they're dirty. They need to stay within their space because that's where they belong. But what Jesus is saying is, let's be able to bring those folks back into community, because that's where they really belong. And that's what, President Snow and the Capitol, they were really trying to continue to keep the power within these few, rather than being able to see how God and how love and how life are within the greater groups.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add about any of these books or about literature in general?
No, I just hope that you'll be able to tell us maybe later on too, our listeners, about stuff that you've heard or ways that you've kind of seen these different parallels within these books, or if there's any other books that you thought of as you listen to this podcast, because I think it's a great way for us to really think about how literature and art is able to help enhance what we believe in and how we talk about that.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. This has been the Ascend at Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.